Hello and welcome, guys. Hope you had a great weekend. Welcome back to school. It's our last week before we get an extended break. Now, here's some things that I want to go over with you today in reference to some of our demographic transition that happens when a country moves from a third world into a first world country. Okay, so follow along with me on this PowerPoint, and then I'll explain your homework assignment, and that should pretty much wrap up what's going to happen for you today on Monday. And then tomorrow we'll get back into the general swing of things and start to talk about more immigration, migration, and be ready for our quiz, our debate, and your next project. Yay. All right, so let's take a look here at the PowerPoint, ladies and gentlemen. So as we're looking at this, is we examine population, you can see that there are two different types of study when we talk about growth in general. All right, we've kind of talked about this a little bit with our initial study and examination on population, that we have linear growth, which is going to denote more or less steady growth, but then we also have exponential growth, where things are starting to compound. All right, now taking a look here, what we have with our current population and more or less the trends that are happening for the majority of the world is that we have exponential growth. That's happening because we have a large population that's compounding. Now, what we see overall that the trend is starting to do and will do in kind of the mid-21st century is that the population is going to stabilize and it's going to plateau. And the reason why this happens is that we have a decreasing amount of fertility rates worldwide. So, what do we use to kind of examine this stuff? We use something called the demographic transitional model. And it's going to look like this, and we're going to go here in just a moment. We're going to go stage by stage and break this down so it makes sense to you. Okay? Any questions? You're going to have to hold them and wait till Tuesday. All right, so the first stage that we see in this model, ladies and gentlemen, is stage 1. Now, that's going to be this area right up here. Now, as we look at this, we can see that there is a very high birth rate, but there's also a very high death rate. So that means a lot of people are being born and a lot of people are dying. All right, so what does this mean? This means that because we have very high death rate and very high birth rate, we have a very low population. Now, a lot of cultures or civilizations are just groups of people in general that are going to epitomize this, are going to be more or less tribal lifestyles and tribal nations and groups of people. Now, as we go into stage 2, you see that there's a dramatic difference now. Now these two lines are starting to separate, where we have a very high birth rate, but our death rate is starting to slow down, it's starting to decrease. So what we see is that this is typical of high economic development, and the death rate is decreasing because of improved health care and more access to food. Stage 3, we can see that the birth rate is starting to slow down. And towards the end of the third stage, we're going to see that the two lines are actually going to come back together. Okay? And that the death rate is slowing down as well. So eventually towards the end here, these two are going to merge, and what we see is that we have a stable economy for the most part, or a stable country in terms of its demographics. And lastly, stage 4, what we see is either very, very slow growth or negative growth. And this is going to be a characteristic that is going to embody a lot of developed first world nations. So what we have here is that the overall population is going to grow. Let me show you a better picture here in just a moment, and I'll kind of explain that, and I'll do it quickly so it'll draw everything back in together. So again, you can kind of see phase 1, high birth rate, death rate is fluctuating, typical countries of Afghanistan, Uganda, Zambia, so on and so forth. Okay, and as the country kind of moves into the developed portion of this, Phase 2, birth rates are going to kind of slow down. Death rates are going to drop dramatically. And so we see this large division. And this is going to be, anytime these two lines get far apart, you have a growing population, substantial growth. So Ghana, Guatemala, Iraq, these are going to be phase 2 countries within the demographic transitional model. Phase 3, this is when birth rate is getting a little closer to replacement levels. So India, Gabon, Malaysia, those are going to be your phase 3 countries. Now what I mean by replacement levels is that after somebody dies, you have to have somebody that replaces them. So that's what we get to in phase 3. Now you'll see in phase 4, sometimes we don't have replacement levels, and that's when this reverses. So this is where we have negative growth. Slow growth, negative growth, slow growth. And phase 4 is very typical of a lot of developed countries. In this case, Brazil, Germany, Japan are fantastic examples. This right here, this is probably the best diagram for this. And the reason why I like this is not only does it chronicle the same stuff that you've already been exposed to, with a high birth rate, high death rate, but it also puts the overall total population in here. So we can see, again, just to repeat myself, and feel free to fast forward if you think you got this, is that with a high birth rate, high death rate, the total population is going to be very low. All right, enter phase 2, high birth rates, low death rates, we see this growth. Now, like I said, anytime these two lines get further apart, you're going to have growth that's going to occur. So, in addition, while I'm talking about this, feel free to pause me and take a look at some of this stuff. This will give you some great examples. It'll also give you some reasoning why these countries are growing or slowing. All right, phase 3, we can see that birth rates are slowing down, death rates are stabilizing, and these lines are coming together. So what we see overall as a population is that we are starting to stabilize. Stage 4, this is when those lines are eventually going to meet, and anytime these lines meet, that means that we are going to level off. Just like they're close here, they're kind of level. Stage 4, they're kind of levels off. Now what we see for future demographics is that the world population is following this same trend. So we can see in a lot of developed countries or third world nations that these two things are coming closer together. So that's good, because that's going to reduce the amount of people that we have on this earth, and it's also going to be a little more healthy for our planet in terms of its carrying capacity that we talked about on Friday. Now, one thing that's interesting to note is that sometimes we have more deaths than we do birth, and then we have a natural rate of decrease. Now, this is a big problem, even though this is a natural trend, because the population is essentially disappearing because they are not producing figures or people above replacement levels. And so as we talk about immigration on Tuesday, we'll talk about why this is a huge issue for your generation and the United States that you will lead. Okay, so what we see here, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to compare two different countries. And this is also going to be something that you're going to want to use as we get into your homework today, is that we look at Sweden and we look at Mexico. And so we chronicle, and that shouldn't say 1950, but what we do is we chronicle here from 1775 all the way to 2000. Now the reason Mexico doesn't start back here is because we don't have records that far back. Sweden we do. Alright, but what you're going to see is that even though the lines are going to look a little bit differently, you're going to see the same transition that essentially is going to occur here. Alright, so if we look at around 1800 or so, we see high birth rates for Sweden and high death rates. So we can see, or we can assume, that the population is going to be low. Alright, but then we get into the mid to late 1800s. Okay, the Industrial Revolution is hitting the world full force. Okay, so that's going to bring a lot of advancements and progress to civilization, society all over the world. So we can see that these two things are separating. So what can we assume? This is in stage 2, that this is going to be the largest growth that we're going to see within Sweden's population. Okay, phase 3 happens about right here, And you can see these two lines dip back together, and this is where things are going to stabilize a little bit more and their population is going to plateau. Okay, the time goes on. By the time we get to the 21st century, we can see that their death rates have fallen below their birth rates. Okay, and as we look at this, let's take a look at Mexico. Start here in about 1900 or so, and you'll see the same trend. Birth and death rates kind of cross and overlap here. Low population, wide gap almost immediately, and then we can see that they're slowly starting to come back together, which is typical now, or it's safe to assume then that Mexico, giving this trend probably in the next 40, 50 years, might be considered a developed country, especially as a periphery to the United States of America. All right, so what do I want you to do today? That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to go to your favorite website in the entire world, and there is a document that I want you to access. And let me back up to show you kind of where that's at, so there's no questions. All right, so we're going to be in Module 18. That's going to be third to first world status, the demographic transitional model. And if you take a look, it's going to be this document. For you, I have actually printed these off, so your sub will have these available for you. Just make sure to reminder. Okay, so it's going to look like this for you, and all I want you to do is you're going to have the CBR, which is crude birth rate, very good, and the CDR, which is crude death rate. Awesome, you're getting this stuff. So again, we can see that 1750 is when this is going to start. Okay, for Sweden, and 1900 is when it's going to start for Mexico. So what you need to do is you need to choose 4 separate colors. Got it? One is going to be the CBR for Sweden, the other for the death rate, and then same thing for Mexico. And as you go down here, this is what I want you to use. Now, you're going to have to read the directions. You can do that. It's only a paragraph, and it's going to explain how I want you to set up this graph. Okay? But essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to plot these lines on this graph, and you're going to see the demographic transitional model emerge for both Sweden and Mexico. So it's a case study of a developed country, that being Sweden, and a developing country, that being Mexico. And then lastly, what I want you to complete before you submit this to your sub today is this last one. Okay, you need to explain which phase each country is currently in according to the demographic transitional model. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today, and you're going to have the entire hour to get this done. You're probably going to need it to listen to this 14-minute video and then complete this assignment. Oops, sorry, forgot to pay the light bill. If you have any questions, ask your sub, or feel free to send me an email. All right, otherwise I'll be back on Tuesday, and we'll pick up and move on with immigration and almost finish this unit. Okay, good luck.